Now, Chris Hedges has the Chris Hedges report, which is on Substack. I highly recommend you guys follow this if you're not following it. But his most recent article is called "Let's Stop Pretending America is a Functioning Democracy." And there's certain parts I'm going to read here, not the entire article, but there's certain pieces I want to touch on. So let's go ahead and get into that. Let's stop pretending America is a functioning democracy. A functioning democracy could easily dispatch Donald Trump and his doppelgangers. A failed democracy and bankrupt liberalism assures their ascendancy. And if you notice the picture here, these are chess pieces. And there's politicians. I'm assuming these are politician faces on the chess pieces. And then there's this, I guess, looks like kind of like a dinosaur creature kind of there. So it's all about playing chess. Listen to this. There is a fatal disconnect between a political system that promises democratic equality and freedom while carrying out socioeconomic injustices that result in grotesque income inequality and political stagnation. Decades in the making, this disconnect has extinguished American democracy. The steady stripping away of economic and political power was ignored by a hyperventilating press that thundered against the barbarians at the gate. Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, the Taliban, ISIS, Vladimir Putin, while ignoring the barbarians in our midst. The slow motion coup is over. Corporations and the billionaire class have won. There are no institutions, including the press, an electoral system that is little more than legalized bribery, the imperial presidency, the courts, or the penal system that can be defined as democratic. Only the fiction of democracy remains. Let's talk about this for just a second. This is something that we've said multiple times over at RBN. A lot of the politicians now, Joe Biden, Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, even AOC is saying this as well. We have to protect and save our democracy. What democracy? Now, I usually talk about it from a voting aspect, but Chris Hedges gave examples in other areas, which I also think is important. The press, the presidency, the courts, the penal system. We don't really have one. Notice how he describes the electoral system as a little bit more than legalized bribery. Well, yeah, it's all about, again, who has the most money. Usually, that's the person that wins. A lot of it is about fundraising. So it's about getting your guy in or getting your woman in. That's really what it's about. And for the Democratic Party to say that they can handpick people, to argue in court and say they can handpick people, we don't have a democracy. Let's go back in. We're going to come to this I want to go to this point right here. The collective self-delusion masks who we have become. A country where the citizenry has been stripped of economic and political power, and where the brutal militarism we practice overseas is practiced at home. In classic totalitarian regimes, such as Nazi Germany or Stalin's Soviet Union, economics was subordinate to politics. But under inverted totalitarianism, the reverse is true. There is no attempt, unlike fascism and state socialism, to address the needs of the poor. Let's highlight this here. Okay, this is a perfect point here. There is no attempt, unlike fascism and state socialism, to address the needs of the poor. Regardless of who we have elected as president, the needs of the poor are not addressed and they're not fixed. It doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat. Poor people a lot of times are stuck where they're at. Some people point to examples like the welfare system is supposed to help people get out of that. It really doesn't. I've known people on welfare. It really doesn't. So I've told you multiple times, when you hear politicians talk about certain class groups, you'll hear them mention middle class. They'll mention working class. They'll mention elite. Never hear them mention poor people. And this was something I noticed even when I interviewed Rokana. There was a question I asked him, and I specifically said working class and poor people. And when he responded to me, he responded with middle class and working class. I didn't say anything about middle class. It's almost as if the poor don't exist. It's almost as if poor people are invisible. Let's go back in here. Rather, the poorer or more vulnerable you are, the more you are exploited. This is important, folks. Thrust into a hellish debt peonage from which there is no escape. Social services, from education to healthcare, are anemic, non-existent, or privatized to gouge the impoverished. Let's highlight this point here. The poorer and the more vulnerable you are, the more you are exploited. Let's give an example. People take advantage of poor people. When people know that you're in dire situation, sometimes people who have more money than you will take advantage of you. I'll give you an example. This is a personal example. I had a coworker. This is when I was waiting tables. Coworker was in a tough situation. Abusive husband. Didn't have a car. He had the car. He kind of controlled the finances per se because he made the most money. And he was a cop. He was abusive. She was walking from their apartment to work, back and forth pretty much every day. She walked. She decided it would be a good idea to tell our supervisor about her home situation, about how she needed to pick up extra shifts because she needed to make more money because her goal was to get out of that situation. And because he was a cop, it wasn't like she could call the police and say, hey, my husband just punched me in the face. Because the police look out for each other. She had no family and she had a kid. What do you do in that situation? So one of my supervisors that knew about that said, okay, I'll let you pick up extra shifts. One day, there was money missing at the restaurant and she showed up late. So guess who's blamed first? The person who is the most in poverty out of all of us that work there. They knew about your situation. They knew the husband was controlling the money and taking the money that you made. So of course they're going to point to you. So she lost her job. The entire time that she worked there, she always felt like she had to be on eggshells after she told that story, because then now people know, then they know you need the money. Yeah, they know we all need to work to pay our bills. But now they really know that you in particular are in a desperate situation and you need these extra shifts. And yes, some people did take advantage of that. People take advantage of poor people. Let's go back in. I want to go to this point here. Right here. This is about diseases, so they're connecting the two. So you can watch an interview I conducted in 2014 with Sheldon Wolin here. In my book, America, the Farewell Tour, I examined the social indicators of a nation in serious trouble. Life expectancy in the US fell in 2021 for the second year in a row. There have been over 300 mass shootings this year. Close to 1 million people have died from drug overdoses since 1999. There are an average of 132 suicides every day. Nearly 42% of the country is classified as obese, with 1 in 11 adults considered severely obese. This is important. These diseases of despair are rooted in the disconnect between a society's expectations of a better future and the reality of a system that does not provide a meaningful place for its citizens. Loss of sustainable income and social stagnation causes more than financial distress. As Emily Durkheim points out in The Division of Labor and Society, it severs the social bonds that give us meaning. A decline in status and power, an inability to advance, a lack of education and adequate health care, and a loss of hope results in crippling forms of humiliation. This humiliation fuels loneliness, frustration, anger, and feelings of worthiness. Put this here. This humiliation fuels loneliness, frustration, anger, and feelings of worthlessness. Being poor is stressful. And sometimes if you're in that situation, yeah, you may feel like you're alone. I had a friend when I was in high school, wouldn't let people come to their house because they didn't want people to see how they lived. I didn't find out until I graduated where they actually lived. That type of loneliness, it can isolate you from people. And then there's one more piece I want to touch on here. Anti-politics masquerades as politics. No sooner does one money-drenched election cycle end, the next one begins, perpetuating what Wolin calls politics without politics. These elections do not permit citizens to participate in power. The public is allowed to voice opinions to scripted questions, which are repackaged by publicists, pollsters, political consultants, and advertisers and fed back to them. Few races, including only 14% of congressional districts, are considered competitive. Politicians do not campaign on substantial issues, but on skillfully manufactured political personalities and emotional change culture wars. This touches on something here about the political personalities. A lot of times when people vote for a candidate, it's because of their personality, not necessarily because of the issues. Roger Meadows knows this. We've talked about this before. Usually it is because of their personality. There's a lot said here. I'm not going to read the entire article because I think you guys should read the entire article yourself. We don't really have a democracy in this country. Very great article by Chris Hedges there. Check it out. Definitely, guys.